I'm here with Joe Baguley, who's the cloud strategist for VMware. Is that right?
I'm the Chief Techologist for VMware.
Chief Techologist for VMware. So Joe, we're here at the CloudScape 5 event in Brussels, and you're talking tomorrow, which is Thursday the 7th. Can you tell us what the title of that talk is?
I think it was, we came up with container ships, kittens, chickens, and coffee shops, I think was the title. It will become apparent tomorrow.
It's all about kind of industry, in the industrialisation of IT.
Correct, yeah. I think it's about the fact that what you're finding is cloud is forcing IT departments to adopt industrialised processes because they're doing things in a more modern, but in a more scale way. And it's the scale that's the important piece, because some of the stuff people do today is not going to scale, and there's new techniques and understanding needs to be taken into account when you start doing things at scale.
Sounds interesting. Okay, so cloud.
Yeah.
Should all businesses move to the cloud? And you know,
one, it depends what you mean by cloud. So let's sort of. I obviously hear probably about hear or read about two definitions of cloud a day. I've worked out. So you're looking at infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service. We look at that as the sort of three main entry platforms for cloud to simplify things. I think a large proportion of companies have already been using software as a service if they don't realise it. I think it's going to be the initial entry point for the large majority of companies, using the technologies, even if it's something as simple as Dropbox, right through to adopting Workday or Salesforce or one of those options. They're already using software as a service, i.e. basically software you don't have to install on your own machine, you pay to use it or run it on someone else's. So I think you'll find a large proportion of companies already using that if they aren't, and they will be over the coming years. As we move down the stack, it gets a slightly more different question, and you get to the more interesting and hotter debates. In fact, sort of the further down you get. Platform as a service, I don't think, as an industry, most organisations are ready for yet. It's the leading edge companies I'm talking to now that are looking to use and adopt platform as a service. There's obviously the startups that are using platform as a service as their launch point, which is really exciting, and that's the same at both levels. But your traditional enterprises, small to medium businesses, I think they're going to be the last point they'll enter is platform as a service. They'll go into infrastructure as a service initially, maybe in the we can host things cheaper, which is kind of why people do virtualization to start with. Virtualize, run it cheaper, and then someone say, well, I can run that virtual machine somewhere else even cheaper. So that's an entry point for some. So I don't think companies will all move entirely to the cloud. I think there'll always be stuff that people keep on site. I think what it's highlighting is where IT departments and then the businesses that they work for differentiate themselves through the use of IT. So if you look at most organisations, large industrial organisations, they will, you talk about the electricity as a utility thing. This is always a good one. Let's go back to Nicholas Carr's, everyone's going to move to use electricity. If we look today at most organisations, they don't use electricity, the public electricity service, as their entirety. Most manufacturing plants, some of them actually have their own power plants because they can't rely on the public utility to do what they want to do. Most large organisations have UPSs, backup generators, etc. And so I think if you take that and move that forward to computing, I think people are still going to keep some things that they want to do specific to them in-house. Okay. Certainly in the near to medium term.
And you touched on cost there, and that's something that I'd like to come back to slightly later.
Yeah.
But one question that I had was, if we're moving computation, businesses moving their computing infrastructure onto the cloud, and they're running virtual machines, what does this mean in the long term for the operating system ecosystem that we have?
It's a bit of a... I suppose it's that... So let's put it this way. You want to run a computer because you want to run an application.
Yeah.
To run that application, you have to run an operating system to be the interface between the hardware and the application you want to run. Okay? And so that's why we have operating systems today. Initially, the operating system choice wasn't important back in the mainframe days. You went and you bought the application, you bought the mainframe that went with it, and the fact that it ran, MVS, VM, or whatever was almost a it had to be there, it was a necessity. Then we entered the sort of late 80s, 90s, when there was differentiation in operating systems and arguments between Windows and Unix and all the other kind of stuff. And I don't know whether that was because we kind of wrapped ourselves up a bit too much in the infrastructure side of things. Cloud's letting us to sort of take the step away from that again. So I think if you look at the original stack that we had, you had hardware, operating system, application. Over time, that's now becoming hardware, abstraction layer from the hardware, application. And those abstraction layers take multiple different forms. It could be a hypervisor running an appliance. That appliance arguably, yes, has a just enough operating system, maybe Linux in it, but in essence it's replaced the operating system. Or if you're looking at platform as a service, your operating system might be the platform itself, Cloud Foundry. There isn't an operating system in there. So it's certainly an interesting time for operating systems as a whole. And what we're seeing in cloud is operating systems becoming not something that sits between one piece of hardware and one or more applications. It's evolving to be operating systems that sit between multiple pieces of hardware and an application, and maybe even between the network and operating the network and operating the storage, much as they did in the old days. So I think you're seeing an evolution of operating systems. So what we called an operating system before isn't going to be what we look at an operating system to be in the future. It's still, however, going to be the piece that sits between your application and the hardware.
It sounds like the kind of the original dream of distributed computing is kind of, where you can completely separate the user from the actual computational infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it, that's what we're building is with cloud infrastructure, whether it's infrastructure as a service, our offerings or others. What you're building is an operating system for the data center, and the ultimate vision being, whatever hardware you like underneath. Mainly x86 based, to be honest. So whatever x86 vendor you like underneath, whatever application you like on top, and these sort of data center operating system underneath that.
Right. Okay. Now here's a bit of a tricky one. Going back to the cost element, is running cloud cheaper for businesses, research institutes?
I think that's a really good question, because people look at technologies such as infrastructure as a service vendors, whether it's our vCloud guys like Colt, etc., or Amazon or whoever, that will offer you a server at this price. There's not many organizations today that can tell you how much it costs to run a server in their own infrastructure. So if they can't fully cost their existing infrastructure, how will they know that it's cheaper to run it somewhere else? And so I think it's causing a lot of people to be maybe introspective as to how they look at their existing infrastructure, because you might find that it's actually, you are running stuff cheaper on site. Some companies have found that, believe it or not. I mean, on the whole, probably, the guys, because they're doing it at scale, are doing it cheaper. They're getting the standard economies of scale, but some people actually are, especially if you take into account, embodied cost and the fact you've already done the investment in it. So I think, on the whole, I think cloud can be more cost effective. I think that the point that we're seeing is there's a choice here, right? As a business, you've got to look, am I looking at IT as something that I have to have, in which case you are going to look to do it cheaper? Or am I looking at IT as something that's going to be able to change the way I do things and make me do things better? A really good example of that is, let's think something like Blockbuster. Okay, so Blockbuster didn't look at, or probably still doesn't to this day, look at IT as a differentiator. They said, my core business is enabling you to rent DVDs and Blu-rays and games, right? And my IT is here to support that. So let's look at how cheaply I can do that. Whereas other companies came along and said, our business is to enable you to watch movies. Let's look at how I can use technology to enable you to watch movies. Now, they may initially not have looked at it as a cost thing, and they probably still don't do today because it's a different model. So it's not necessarily cheaper, it's a very complicated situation.
So you've got companies like Netflix and all the similar
Netflix and Amazon Love Film, and, those kind of things. They looked at the fundamental difference there is that they're not focused on, are we doing it cheaper? That's important. But actually it's, am I using technology to get a competitive edge again? And that's what we're seeing the rise of in our industry, which is why there's all this kind of excitement. If you're just racing to look at what I'm doing today, but can I do it cheaper? It's a bit of a hiding to nothing in some cases. If you're looking at how can I make use of cheaper resources to do something different, that can be interesting.
Okay, so we discussed the cost element, but what about the cost to the environment? moving things into the cloud. So you've got these big data storage centers. That I mean, is that how does that play out in terms of trying to be greener?
Well, so this is I've looked at this area specifically for quite a long time. I was involved in the European Code of Conduct for data centres and stuff at the British Computer Society around data centre efficiency calculations, looking at PUE and all those kind of things. And it then got raised up to a different level because you've got the classic argument that, well, if people are using video conferencing, they're travelling less and all these other different things. The bottom line is, people aren't knocking down data centres, they're building more. As computing gets cheaper to use, people will use more computing to do more interesting things. And so, yes, we are going to use more power in the future to do compute because we're just doing more computing. It's an unstoppable thing. I think the important thing is that when you look at putting things in a data center, what you're doing there is you're focusing on running that as efficiently as possible. Every data center today is looking at their major cost actually is power. If you cost out a data center, the cost of buying the hardware at the start, when you actually look at it over a 3-year period, becomes almost negligible. Your real cost starts to become in software, but more importantly, in running the power and cooling for the data center. So someone operating a data center is massively focused on that because it becomes a big issue for them. If I'm running a couple of computers in a server room in my office, I don't tend to think about the power cost. I probably don't even see the bill. So it's good in that it's going to force people to, if we are using all this compute, use it more efficiently. Is it good for us? Well, you could argue, is cracking the human genome to, solve cancer and make people healthier or whatever, is that a worthwhile cause to actually expend energy on? Yes. Is climate modelling the stuff that we have to do to work out all this stuff? So there's a lot of, it's a very, very grey area, but I think at least we're making sure that by putting it in the data centres, we're doing this efficiently as we possibly can.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for talking to me, Joe.
No problem.
Okay, thanks.